Hello everyone, welcome back to the Card Combo Show with me, Chocobilly, where we look at card combos in the Final Fantasy TCG. And this week you'll be shocked to learn that we're going to be looking at only lightning cards. Make sure to like and subscribe as it helps the channel immensely and allows me to create more great stuff like this. Right, the cards I'm going to be looking at this week are Azul from Opus 4, Lightning from Opus 5, Al-Cid from Opus 14, Ramuh, Lord of Levin from Opus 14, and finally Feolthanos from Opus 10. So a lot of big boys. Right, first and foremost, Azul. So, a 5 CP 8k lightning forward, with the text, when Azul is put from the field into the break zone, choose one lightning monster across 3 or less in your break zone, you may play it onto the field. So, when this card came out, and for many sets after, Azul didn't have very many good targets to be able to bring onto the field, but now there's a fair few decent cards that he can combo with and bring onto the field. So, first in my point of view would be Trapdoor. So Trapdoor is just a fantastic monster. All of the monsters in Opus 14, which require you to have 3 of one element to be able to make them forwards, is a very easy, unless you're kind of bricking your deck, a very easy prerequisite to hit. And not to mention that it's also got the text of when Trapdoor is put from the field into the break zone, choose one forward opponent controls, break it. Now what's good about that is the fact that Trapdoor doesn't have to be a forward for that to trigger either. So if your opponent just breaks Trapdoor, you still get to break a forward that your opponent controls, so really good. But yeah, obviously Azul can break, be put into the break zone, and then bring in Trapdoor from your break zone, and then you can have Trapdoor there sitting menacingly to hopefully block another forward opponent controls, and when that dies, you get to break another forward. So realistically, Azul, or if your opponent were attacking, for example, Azul could block, kill something, Trapdoor comes in, that blocks something else, that kills something, and then Trapdoor also gets to kill something with its break effect as well. So really good. Not to mention the fact that Trapdoor, you could break Trapdoor intentionally yourself to put it into the break zone, so then when Azul dies, Trapdoor can then come back in, and obviously Trapdoor leaving would have killed something, you know, it's lots of good ways to be able to combo it. Kamai, I don't know how to say it. So you can put it into the break zone and your opponent or a forward will lose 7k power, or at damage 5 you can have a forward lose 9k power. So at damage 5, Azul could block something, and then you can use Kanakamoi when it re-enters, put it into the break zone again, to then make that forward that blocked or attacked and was blocked by Azul lose 9k power. So realistically, Azul at that point was a 17k blocker, which is ridiculous. But even still, at just, you know, its standard ability of minus 7k power to something is really good. And again, it means that Azul blocking something will kill it. Propagator, so kind of a mixture of the first 2 monsters really. So when it enters the field, you get to choose a forward that loses 2k power. So if Azul blocked a 9k or a 10k forward, or, you know, or attacked and then died too, Azul would die, bring a Propagator. Propagator would then make that forward lose 2k power, so then that forward would probably die as well. But also at damage 3, it also becomes a forward of 7k power as well, and it's a nice cheap forward, a cheap monster even. So it's easy to play even without having to use Azul. Electric Jellyfish! So, Electric Jellyfish comes back onto the field, choose a forward, give it haste, and then you can also choose a forward to dull it out as well. So maybe you have played a forward onto the field this turn, and Azul was already there ready to attack. You can attack with Azul, your opponent blocks, Azul dies, bring Electric Jellyfish to then give a forward you played this turn haste, and then you can dull out a blocking forward your opponent controls as well. Skeleton. So obviously Azul being able to play things onto the field will increase Skeleton's counters, not to mention the fact that Azul can also just bring Skeleton onto the field as well. Right, Cloud. So, dull and put one category 7 forward into the break zone and search one forward of cost 1 CP or more than the forward put into the break zone and play it onto the field. So, obviously, Cloud putting us all into the break zone would mean that you get to search a forward of 6 CP, which is really good, but you also get to play a monster onto the field as well. So, being able to use this to get, I don't know, Trapdoor onto the field and then something like Ravana, that's a big swing in your favour. Not to mention the fact that both of those forwards are not hard to get rid of necessarily, but they're, well, Ravana's hard to get rid of, and Trapdoor you don't want to get rid of, so it's quite awful for your opponent to have to face against. Tifa. So imagine Azul with the threat of bringing something like Trapdoor or Kanakamui, but it also has plus 2k in Brave. So Azul as a 10k brave forward, so you can keep on attacking. Your opponent doesn't block it because you don't want to bring in the forwards, or bring the monsters, sorry, and also you don't want to attack because Azul can block, and then when he dies, bring in something as well. So it just makes Azul even more formidable. Okay, lightning. So just a nice little 2CP 5k haste lightning forward with the interesting text of at the end of the turn, return lightning to its owner's hand. Now, just reading that aloud means you've already guessed what the play is here, but combining it with something like Leviathan. So it also kind of works with Bismarck as well. Bismarck bounces something at the end of the turn anyway, so technically you could have 2 triggers of this if you wanted, but then you would be in lightning, wind, water, which is kind of strange, but still. You can have it so that lightning comes onto the field, and then at the end of the turn, lightning will come back to your hand. That will trigger Leviathan's ability of when a forward return to the hand, at which point you get to minus 9k something as well. And obviously you can play lightning onto the field every turn, attack hopefully, and if not, just playing lightning onto the field just to be able to get that 9k trigger at the end of the turn, or force your opponent to respond to having lightning go back to your hand, is pretty decent, to be honest. And knowing that you're going to be able to get a 9k trigger off every turn with lightning in hand is pretty good. Jake. So, play lightning onto the field, you've got Jake there. Lightning is now a 9k haste forward, for only 2 CP, that's pretty good. And then the fact that lightning comes back to your hand means that the next time when you play it again, it will be a 9k forward again. So, lightning kind of has the protection of being in your hand, so that realistically, she's going to be kind of hard to get rid of, unless your opponent can react then and there on your turn when you play her. But her being a 9k forward as well, pretty good. Skeleton. So again, obviously lightning plays onto the field, that will give a counter to skeleton every turn, but as lightning returns to your hand, you can keep replaying her, which means that skeleton keeps on gaining counters and eventually get to break more forwards with it as well. Now, if you combine this with the likes of Glorka, it means that obviously lightning only costs you 1 CP. So being able to play 1 CP just to be able to add a counter to skeleton every turn is really good. But then you combine that with the likes of any of the previous cards I've shown really, so something like Jake, so you're playing 1 CP to get a 9k forward, which actually become 10k because Glorka has the ability as well, and then adding counters to your skeleton, and if you've got Leviathan as well, then if at that point your opponent's probably screwed anyway, but still, all these work excellently together. And then Zemus, so just paying 2 CP to bring lightning back onto the field, which might not seem like the best thing in the world, but actually it's a good way. If you're not going to use Zemus, if you can't use Zemus, but you want cards in hand, then Zemus, you can use Zemus just to bring lightning onto the field, and then at the end of the turn, lightning comes back to your hand, so it's actually giving you more cards in hand. Obviously you had to pay the 2 CP anyway, so it could be with your backups, but backups will get reactivated, whereas adding lightning to hand means that you are increasing your hand size, which means that your following turn, you may actually be able to start the turn with 7 cards rather than 6, which may be more beneficial to you. So being able to convert those backups into actual card advantage as well is pretty decent. Snow. So you play Snow onto the field, you pay 2 CP to bring in Lightning. Lightning can maybe attack, maybe not, I don't know. But then again, at the end of the turn, that 2 CP gets converted into hand. So it's another way of being able to just search something and get it into your hand immediately, and the 2 CP isn't technically wasted, because if you get an attack off, that's great, and if you don't, you still get to keep that 2 CP as a card in your hand. Okay, Al-Cid, so an interesting card. A Ice Lightning 8k dual element forward. When Al-Cid enters the field, you may play 1 Ice or Lightning forward, of course 4 or less, from your hand onto the field. So that, in and of itself, is incredibly powerful. But also, when Al-Cid or an Ice forward enters your field, choose up to 1 forward, freeze it. When a Lightning forward you control attacks, choose 1 forward, dull it. So, very, very strong. So, something like Snow. This is a Snow that doesn't get played a huge amount, and generally when it is played, it brings out the Lightning backup, which is a decent enough play. Being able to have that consistency to your deck is fantastic. But obviously, Al-Cid comes onto the field, you get to freeze something, then Snow comes onto the field, you get to freeze another forward if you want. Then what you would do is pay 5 with Snow to bring in Lightning. So this Lightning, when it enters the field or attacks, choose 1 forward opponent controls. If you control a category 13 character other than Lightning, dull it. Obviously you do, because you've got Snow. So what this actually means is that you've played Al-Cid to play Snow, to play Lightning. Now you've frozen 2 of your opponent's forwards. Now they may not necessarily be dull, but they're frozen all the same. Lightning entering the field then means you get to dull one of those forwards out. And then as Lightning has haste, you can attack, and either from the Al-Cid trigger or from Lightning's own trigger, you get to dull the other forward out as well. So actually, from Lightning entering the field and attacking, you actually get to dull 3 forwards out of the way, which is really good. And not to mention the fact that you've also frozen 2 of those forwards as well. So, pretty good. And you know what, paying that's 9 CP for 3 forwards, with a lot happening every time you attack, is scary for your opponent. Renoa. This is just a funny combo. You bring in Al-Cid, freeze something, to bring in Renoa, freeze something. Renoa will then flicker Al-Cid. Al-Cid re-enters, you get to freeze something, and then Al-Cid will bring in another forward of 4 CP or less for Ice and Lightning. I mean, that's just, you get to freeze something else as well. It's hilarious. Yeah, just a really good combo, and to be honest, it's worth it. Aranea. So, at damage 3, when Aranea enters the field, choose one lightning forward, of course 2 or less in your breaks, and play it onto the field. Pretty good. But at damage 6, Aranea, the forwards you control gain haste. So that's every forward. And obviously Al-Cid fulfills his own prerequisite of being both lightning and ice, so Al-Cid can enter, free something, and then if he gains haste off of Aranea, he will then also be able to attack and dull out that forward that was frozen. So similar to the lightning snow play earlier, Aranea will also have haste, and same for the forward that she would bring in as well. So being able to dull out loads of forwards just from playing Al-Cid into Aranea into something else, and having all these forwards that can now attack and dull all your opponent's forwards out of the way is super strong. Zeramus. Obviously these two came out in the same set, so this is not exactly a surprising play, but it's still really good nonetheless, and I wanted to talk about it because obviously when Al-Cid brings in Zeramus, you actually get to freeze 3 things because Al-Cid triggers twice, once for himself and once for Zeramus, and then Zeramus triggers himself as well. But at damage 3, Zeramus also gains haste, which means that when it attacks, you also get to freeze another thing, a character actually for Zeramus, which is really good. But also that triggers Al-Cid's attack ability because Zeramus is also lightning, so you get to dull out a forward as well. So from Al-Cid playing Zeramus, you've actually been able to freeze 2 forwards, at least 1 character from the entry of Zeramus, another character from Zeramus attacking, and then dulling out a forward as well through Zeramus attacking with Al-Cid's ability. Yeah. Maya. So Al-Cid brings in Maya. Al-Cid got to freeze something. Maya, you just go to attack phase, you get to choose a forward, dull it, nice and simple, but you just get to dull that forward that got frozen, so now it is dull and frozen, and these are 2 decent forwards, so it means that every turn after this, when Maya attacks, you get to dull 2 things out with Maya. Emmet Selk, so more consistency based. Al-Cid brings in an Emmet Selk, you pay 4, so you've paid a total of 8 CP, but to get you a backup. Now obviously these 2 have entered, which means you've frozen 2 of your opponent's forwards. You could then bring in something like Eduardo, which would dull all your opponent's characters, which would also mean that those 2 forwards are now frozen and dull. But there's loads of excellent backups you could bring in. This is just a really good combo because you gain 2 forwards and a backup, so even if your backup line isn't going so well, being able to play Al-Cid into Emmet Selk to then get a backup line, or get a backup at all, just puts a lot of pressure on your opponent for only paying 8 CP. Nyx. So Al-Cid brings in Nyx. Now when Nyx enters the field, put 1 drop Kingslave you control into the break zone. When you do so, choose one forward, break it. When a drop Kingslave other than Nyx you control is put from the field into the break zone, select one of the 2 following options. Nyx gains haste until the end of the turn, or choose one forward and dull it. So if Al-Cid were to bring in Nyx and Nyx was the only Kingsglaive, he would break himself. But you get to break a forward, which isn't the worst thing in the world. So you've got to freeze something and break a forward opponent controls just for playing Al-Cid. That's fine. But if you do have something like Looch or Crow on your backup line, it means that Al-Cid comes in, freezes something, Nyx comes in, will then break something by breaking your backup. Then you can also choose to give Nyx haste as well. Nyx can then attack, or give himself haste, rather than choosing a forward and dulling it, because when Nyx attacks, that will trigger Al-Cid's ability to then dull a forward out anyway. So you kind of get the best of both worlds with Nyx. You get both of his options by giving him haste, attacking, and getting the dull from Al-Cid anyway. Ramuh, Lord of Levin. So, fantastic guy. I built a Ramuh deck based on this guy, and it uses the new Ramuh summon, which isn't the best in the world, but it's actually quite fun nonetheless anyway. So it's a 5 CP and 9k Lightning Primal. If you have 2 or more Lightning summons in your break zone, Ramuh, Lord of Levin, I'm just going to call him Ramuh, gains haste. And when Ramuh or a Lightning summon deals damage to your forward, break it. So when this guy came out, the first thing everyone thought of was Raiden, because deal 2000 damage to all the active forwards opponent controls, draw 1 card. So if your opponent's got 5 active forwards and you cast Raiden with Ramuh in the field, they're now broken. That's crazy. That's so good. Now obviously it does only hit the active forwards as well though. So if you wanted to run it alongside something like Rubicante, which never gets played, because when Rubicante attacks, you get to activate all your opponent's forwards. But if you attack Rubicante, you activate them all, then you cast Raiden. Whilst you also got Ramuh, you just broke all of your opponent's forwards, which is hilarious. Okay, Thancred. So, Dull, choose one attacking category 14 forward you control against first strike until the end of the turn. That makes Ramuh even more powerful, because obviously when Ramuh deals damage to something, it will break that forward. So even if Ramuh is being blocked by a 10k forward, he will still break it. But that also means Ramuh dies as well. But if you give him first strike through something like Thancred, which is just a Dull, which is really useful, Ramuh now breaks literally anything. Provided that forward doesn't also have first strike as well, Ramuh will break whatever is blocking him. Ninja, so similar sort of thing. So Ninja is one of those interesting cards where it gives a forward another ability, but actually gives it the text as well. So when Ninja enters the field, choose one forward, it gains, when this forward attacks, choose one forward, deal it 5,000 damage till the end of the turn. So this would mean actually that when Ramuh attacks, it would deal 5k to something, and when Ramuh deals damage to a forward opponent controls, it breaks. So, you know, even if you play 2 ninjas on this turn, to then give Ramuh that ability twice, and then he attacks and does it to 2 different forwards, you get to break 2 things as well, which is amazing. But yeah, it still fulfills Ramuh's prerequisite of being able to deal damage, break it, so that's an excellent ability. And then finally, Kuchaspel. So yeah, you probably want to run Ramuh in a fire lightning deck, as you can tell, because it's got some good synergies, kind of, anyway. But ultimately, it's just the fact that Ramuh or the lightning summon have to be able to deal damage to it, and if your opponent has some form of damage mitigation in the way, then he's not going to be able to break them. But using something like Kuchaspel to make it so that the damage cannot be reduced is excellent, and that means Ramuh will be killing things. And finally, Feolthanos. 7 CP, 9k forward with the text, summons and abilities of your opponent must choose Feolthanos if possible. When Feolthanos is chosen by your opponent's summons of cost 5 or less, or an ability of the character of cost 5 or less, cancel its effect. So when this dude came out, he was a nightmare. I mean, he still is kind of a problem, but unfortunately a couple of the cards in Opus 14, I'm sure you know which one I'm talking about, can deal with him pretty quickly. But still, if your opponent doesn't have a means of dealing with Feolthanos, then that can be gained then and there, because he can just cancel anything and everything. Well, not anything, but, you know, a lot of things. So running something like Summoner from Opus 1 is really, really good with Feolthanos, because ultimately your opponent can break Feolthanos maybe with something like the Type 0 Bahamut 0 summon. Is a 6 CP summon, and it just outright breaks forward. Same for the 7 CP Odin as well. It's just very easy to break Feolthanos with that. But given that Summoner doesn't even have to be active to use its ability, and it's just a cost of 1 ice to be able to cancel literally any summon, is super good. So being able to just pay 1 CP when your opponent has invested probably 6, 7, 8 CP into their summon is kind of a kick in the gut. Cid Randall, similar sort of thing. So you want to basically save Feolthanos from being killed from things like, oh, I don't know, Leviathan. Anyone sick of that card yet? But yeah, it's just another way of being able to make it so Feolthanos can stay alive and not be able to be targeted by the abilities of the bigger forwards entering the field. Now, obviously, that only stops entry abilities, so static effects that are just on the field thereafter, not much you can do about, unfortunately. But it just means that your opponent has to invest even more for a more delayed effect when Feolthanos is still going to be sticking around and being a problem for them. Ovalia. So your opponent invests a lot of CP into killing Feolthanos. Ovalia S, bring Feolthanos back on. Your opponent's got the same problem again. Bartandless. So, because Feolthanos has to be broken from something that costs a lot of CP, it means that if you start taxing your opponent of their CP, they're not going to be able to pay as much, and they're going to have to start hoarding cards in hand. So using something like Barthandless, or some of the other tax cards as well, maybe Flandit, to make it even harder for your opponent to be able to do things, and them having to CP for things other than killing Feolthanos, just means that Feolthanos probably isn't going anywhere for a while. And finally, Ritz. What use is a lightning rod if it's not protecting something? So having Feolthanos there and just sitting there and stopping your opponent from casting summons or doing whatever is all well and good, but if they're still attacking and you're not blocking Feolthanos because you don't want him to die, then really, what was the point? So having something like Ritz, which can just swoop under all of your opponent's forwards and keep on dealing damage to your opponent, whilst also reactivating backups, you know, just having that one forward that your opponent really wants to get rid of, but they can't because of Feolthanos, is just super infuriating, but fun to run. Alright, another episode wrapped up. Sorry about the kind of bunged up sound, I'm a bit ill at the moment. Don't worry, I do not have coronavirus. I've taken many, many tests and I am fine. I just have a head cold that is making its way downtown and walking fast, because a fair few people I know have got it now as well. But you know, that's what happens after being locked inside your house for nearly 2 years. No one's got any antibodies to be able to prepare themselves from anything else, so yeah, it hits you hard. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. As I said before, please make sure to like and subscribe, because it really makes a big difference, and I'll catch you on the flip side.